All right, Brandon Parmer, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks for making time on this Friday afternoon. I'm sure you could have many more things to be doing. Like going out for a long run.
Yeah, I mean, long runs are my jam. I love it.
Let's talk. Let's talk about that. Let's get right into that. I want to talk about a bunch of stuff. And when we were looking at our lineup of guests, I was like, I got a guy who's just this really cool, eclectic mix of all this, like, Division I football player, ultra marathoner, lawyer. I was like, I got a guy I want to bring on because he's got some cool parts to his story. So let's start with the what would you call yourself, an ultra marathoner? Is that what you?
I wouldn't call myself even a runner, John. And let me back up here, man. So totally crazy. Thanks for having me on. You've had some amazing guests on this podcast, and I'm humbled to be in their company. I mean, the businessmen, the businesswomen, sports figures, astronauts. I mean, really, really cool. So hey, just want to say thanks again before I forget for having me on to talk about Brandon. But to answer your question, yeah, I don't even think of myself as a runner. Quite honestly, I've never been a runner. I've been an average athlete at best. But I just been driven to do crazy things and motivated, and it's worked out well for me.
So I want to give the listeners some context. You and I went up to a Penn State game with our group that we go up every year. We go up for a game. And we were sitting down having a beer, and we started talking about your long distance runs. And there was a point where I think you told me, what's your longest one? 400 and some miles?
314 to be exact. Yeah.
314 miles. And this isn't like over the course of 9 months where you ran a couple a day. This is one single run that you just didn't stop.
It's
right?
It's one run. Yeah, one run. It's across 5 states, starting in Missouri, ending in Georgia in the middle of July when the heat index is over 110. It just, you got 10 days to finish it. It took me about 7, but awesome experience.
There's lots more to that story that really, that's sort of what's intrigued me. And I was like, man, I got to get you on to tell. Like we're like on this podcast, we're all about telling, just bringing out guests' cool stories. And you and I sat down over a couple beers and you were telling me some of the nuances, and I was like, nah, I ran 2 marathons before. I was like, but like it's a couple hours. I was like, so how much different? And what you described to me about where you sleep, how you resupply yourself, what you're feeding on, where where you're sleeping and everything, it just kind of blew my mind. I didn't even know this was a sport. That it was sort of like hobo meets like Forrest Gump meets like it was just this like amalgamation of the most absurd stuff. And I was like, you put yourself through this. You're like, yeah, dude, I want to test myself. So before I talk about like the the mental piece of it, I want you to kind of give just a rundown of some of that same stuff you told me. Like, so 314 miles, 5 states, 7 days. You don't have a van that's running with you that resupplies you. You're going through. You have everything you need. You're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, we could talk for days about this race. It was an awesome experience. John, let me set the stage for folks listening to you, sort of leading up to this race, right? Because the first question I get is, "Are you crazy?" Usually. I know you've had a lot of adventure in your life, so maybe your threshold for crazy is a little different than most. But no, I'm not crazy. I'm just super motivated to have adventure. I started by saying I'm not a runner, and I still don't think of myself as that. I had a bucket list early 2000s, and that was to run a marathon. And this odd thing happened as I started training for this marathon. I had never run more than maybe a 5K in my life. But as I increased my mileage during my training runs, as one does, I started to wonder, how far can I go? What's the limits of my body? And so, clearly I was able to finish that first marathon. And then I got to thinking, what's next? What can I do? What's more? What's out there? And I heard about something called the 24-hour race format. 24-hour race format is usually a 1 mile loop. It could be as short as a track, 400-meter track. It could be as long as 2 or 3 miles. The 1 mile loop, and you run it continuously for 24 hours. Person with the most loops wins. I had no visions of winning, but I wanted to test myself. And it's the ultimate test when you run by your car every mile and can quit. It's really easy to throw in the towel.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But
because there's no distance, right? It's no distance. You have to just keep going for 24 hours.
Purely based on time. And you have folks that use this as a gauge to run their first half marathon, their first marathon, their first ultra marathon. The gold standard is typically 100 miles in 24 hours. The elites, the top of the top, can do 150, 160 miles in that 24-hour period.
And people have run this on a high school track.
So, lady just set the 48-hour record on a track just this last week. It was a world record. I forget what she got. It was some well over 200 miles in 48 hours.
Dude, I get bored if the same show comes on TV. I get bored. I'm like, I watched that show last time. I couldn't imagine running a quarter-mile loop for 48 or even 24, well, hell, even for 60 minutes. That's the mental piece of it. That is absolutely insane to me. I don't know if my adult ADD just doesn't allow me to do it.
It's not as bad as it sounds. I love that format. It's my favorite format. You know why?
Really?
It's a mindless exercise, and you go through ups and downs in a 24-hour period, right? And you have a chance to really dig deep inside you and start thinking about things and solving world problems. It's just a great activity to see how far you can push yourself in 24 hours. So that was my foray, if you will, into longer distance running. I ran 71 miles, maybe my first attempt. I learned a lot about myself, but I wasn't happy.
Did you go for the full 24 hours?
Yeah.
Did you really? Wow.
I mean, and we use the term in ultra running. We use the term running loosely. It's a run, a walk, it's a crawl.
Did you keep moving for 24 hours around that loop?
You know, aside from like shoe changes and first aid. Yeah. 24 hours. Wow. But I wasn't happy, John. I wasn't happy. I knew I could do better. So I went back to another one, same place next year. And I beat it, 75, 76 miles. But I still was missing that end point. Like I knew I had more. So I figured, why not sign up for a 100-mile race? That'll force me to run 100 miles. I did that. I finished that 27, 28 hours, something like that. But then I was like, gosh, that's still not the end, right? Like, I know I've got more. Where is that limit? And so the next obvious jump was at 314 miles. Go for it, right?
Wait, you went from 100 miles to 314?
I did. I mean, there's really not many races out there that are between 100 and 314 miles. Although I did just a few months ago run 200 miles across Ohio, as we talked about before, as you know.
Before we dig into the 314, I got to ask, was there a difference? And there's so much to unpack about the mindset and the mentality. But before we go too deep on that, was there a difference in in you going 24 hours and you're just trying to get, you can't really win that. You can't, because there's no end point for distance. When you're just doing the 24-hour, you just have to get to a 24-hour mark. Whereas the 100-mile, you just had to get to a physical distance endpoint. Was there a difference in the mindset that it took to race those two?
Slightly, right? The 100-mile race was basically 10-mile loops. So it was kind of a bigger version of the 1 mile loop, if you think of it that way, right? And the challenge is there's a physical challenge to it. There's always a physical challenge to anything that extreme. It's a mental piece.
Yeah.
If your head's not straight, if you don't believe you can finish at the start line, you're going to find every excuse you can at 2:00 in the morning to jump in your car and drive home, right? And so when you're passing your car every mile, or every 10 miles, that you've got to find that motivation to keep going. And that's fun. That's exciting.
Now that's an interesting way to put it, because that's a lot of people would say, well, like, and I think everybody would agree, that's where you figure out what you're made of, or if you're there for the right reasons. That's where you figure out, am I in this for the right reasons? It's not at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody's fun and people are cheering on the sidelines. It's when everybody else goes home and you're alone by yourself at 2 a.m. and you're like, oh yeah, I'm reminded of like the Hey Kids, Big Ben, Parliament, like where they're stuck in the traffic circle and in National Lampoons. And I suspect there had to have been, I almost feel like running the distance, you're like, okay, there's I have to do 10 laps of this 10-mile track or a 10-mile loop, right? So there's 9 laps left. There's 8 laps. There's 7 laps, where I almost feel like that might be, and I use the word easier very loosely, that might be easier than there's no end to the number of loops. You just have to keep moving. And you're like, I can make myself run faster or slower or something on the 10-mile loop, but I can't speed up time. Like, I just have to keep going. So I'm really fascinated by that, the 24-hour and maybe what it took you to keep going when you're like, God, when's the sun ever going to come up? Or it's only 2. And then you look at the clock again, it's only 2:15. And then you look at the clock again, and it's only 2:45. And you felt like it's been like 7 hours.
Yeah, it slows down for sure, John. While there is a difference, right, in mileage, there are people that can run that 100-mile race in 12 or 13 hours, right? Yeah. They know they're going to be done while everybody else is still out there grinding. The key to both of those, whether it's a distance race or a time race, and whether you're running the 5K around your neighborhood or you're running 24 hours, is to break it into smaller pieces, smaller steps, right? What's that saying? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? This is that. This is, can I make it to the next light pole? Can I make it till the next lap? Can find that next, that next segment and finish that. Don't think about, I've got to run for 24 hours. You think about, I got to do another loop. And that's how I get through it personally. It's breaking it down into smaller, manageable pieces.
So let me go back to your story. You finished the 100-miler, and before we get to the 314 miler, what's driving you to keep saying, I want to do more. I want to do more. Is it like, have you not felt like you have hit a wall that you just couldn't get over yet, like an emotional wall or physical wall?
It's a challenge, right? It's the adventure. I've just been motivated to do more, and I don't know that I can explain it or put it in words. People will say, why do you do this? And I've got a half a dozen reasons that inspire me to go out there and run these long distances. But it's just finding it within yourself. What drives you, and finding my limits is exciting. Safely finding my limits. Obviously, there's unsafe ways to push limits, but long distance running is fairly safe exercise.
So you sign up for this 314. Do you know what you're getting into at this point?
Oh yeah. There's books published on it. And this is just when COVID was starting too. So there was a lot of time to go out and train, training runs overnight through my neighborhood, all sorts of just long runs, and time on your feet is critical. Whether you're walking, you're running, you're standing, time on your feet is probably one of the most important things to do to train for that race.
When you're training for a 7-day straight run, 300 plus miles, are you doing, you just mentioned it, like, are you going out for 18 hours at a time and just putting yourself through rigors?
No, that's impossible. It's impossible for me, for my schedule. I've got family, I've got work. You have to find your comfort zone. So much of these long races, only a little bit of it is physical. It really boils down to the mental training and getting yourself in focus just like any other sport or military activity. You've got to be focused, and if you're not mentally there and mentally present and believe in yourself, you're not going to finish. And that to me is the hardest part, is getting yourself mentally ready for the task at hand.
So you sign up, you'd say you're coming out of COVID, you know what you're getting into. So kind of walk our listeners and viewers, like what does that environment look like? And I know because you've told me, but I want you to kind of explain like where you were sleeping, where you were eating, what you were eating. Because I think a guy like myself had this image that there was a support van and they had gallons of Gatorade and like some sort of like liquid IV on standby, and you were eating like only like wheat germ and stuff that was like super perfect for runners. But it sounded like it was the complete opposite.
It was. So you can sign up for this race in one of two categories. You can sign up as crewed, which allows you to have sort of your own chase vehicle. Family or friends, whoever has time to follow you across 5 states for a week, right? It's usually who it ends up being. And those folks, have the support. They have the change of clothes, the food, the water, everything. And then there's what they call the screwed division, and that's what I signed up for. Screwed division means you can't accept any help from anybody's crew. You're basically on your own. You can accept help from what they call road angels, which are usually local folks or anybody that happens upon you as you're on the road. So let's be clear. This race is entirely alongside of roads and highways, basically the shoulder. You're always running against traffic, but the people that pull over and hand you water or a coffee or whatever, it's really a cool experience that some random stranger pulls over, wants to talk to you and give you something to eat or drink. So screwed means I'm on my own. I find my own food, water, sleep wherever I can find it. That often meant eating out of gas stations. It meant sleeping on church porches. They're generally a safe place to camp for the night or for a few hours. You never sleep all night. There are a few hotels, not nice at all. You'd probably rather sleep on the floor of a garage, which I did that as well. Some people along the course will leave out a lawn chair. You can catch a quick nap on a lawn chair. But it's the ultimate freedom, John. And you're broken down to the bare necessities. Where do I get food, water, and how do I take care of myself with first aid?
And so when you're running, you're eating at gas stations. I think you told me you slept under an overpass at one time. You're running along some very busy streets. You're not necessarily on I-95, but you're on roads that have traffic going along with them. And there was gosh, I'm having a total brain fart. There was some other element of what you told me. Going, or like you don't have like a full like heavy backpack. You're not on a hike. That you're trying to do like a slow shuffle or trot, which means you're traveling very light. So you don't have resupplies, like a whole thing of resupply with you. You're traveling super light, and you're wearing through a pair of sneakers.
Yeah, that's a funny story. But so you're right. The lighter, the better. There are some folks that do this every year that have it down to basically a Ziploc bag, and that's a debit card and maybe a Band-Aid. I'm not exaggerating. Literally a Ziploc bag. I think my pack was probably in the 6 to 8 pound region, and you tend to toss things as the days wear on, and you realize you don't need them anymore. So you dispose of items as you go. You pick up others. I've been known to shop for some warm clothes overnight. Things tend to get chilly, and I'll stop at a Dollar General and buy a pair of sweatpants for the night to keep myself warm, and then toss them out the next morning. So funny story about the shoes. It's this is mid-July. We start in Missouri, we go through Kentucky, then we spend most of our time in Tennessee. We go through Georgia and one other state. I'm drawing Alabama, and so like I said, it's really hot. And the start of this race, the very first morning, I was about a marathon in at this point, pulling up to the first town. and my shoes have been sticking to the ground. There had been some fresh blacktop laid, and I thought nothing of it other than maybe I stepped in some gum or something. But so I ducked into a Subway to get some food, and so I had a nice big sub, and I looked at my shoes, and I realized my shoes had melted. It's so hot out there that the bottom of my shoes had melted. Now that's a problem, right? And it's a bigger problem when you're in rural Tennessee and no one's going to carry those specialized running shoes that I've been training in for months. Folks have been known to run this race in sandals. Your feet tend to swell, and sandals obviously accommodate swelling. Others have been known to pick up shoes in Walmart, if they can find them. I stuck with those shoes, but it was painful having no rubber on the bottom and just running on the foam alongside the road with the rocks and the roadkill. Got a little messy.
No way. You're running the tread is gone and it's just the foam cushion.
Yeah. So I had about 275 miles to go on foam, but I survived.
Oh, this happened early.
It was early. It was the first marathon or so.
God, where do you hit your first wall? And I don't mean everybody. I mean, just for you, like having done that, like where is it in the first 20 miles where you're like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Or is it at the 150 mile mark where you're like, oh my God, I'm only halfway?
There's, I like I described before, there's these kind of, you create these mini races within the race itself, right? And different moments of accomplishment. And by having those, you sort of minimize those down periods, but everybody goes through some deep, dark periods out there. That's just a fact. And it's those periods can be tough to overcome. But when you know that they're going to happen, you can pull yourself out, and it's not easy, but you're going to come out on the other side. And whether it's the sun coming up or some cold water or something will bring you back out again. It's quite the roller coaster. There's no defined point, John. It could be you have low sugar. It could be you're tired. It could be anything. It could be you've got a blister. It could be anything that throws your mind into this spiral. And knowing how to pull yourself out is key to finishing.
You use the word deep, dark periods. That's an interesting way to phrase it, because I think everybody would understand that you go into periods where you're feeling sorry for yourself or you're questioning, like, should I just quit? Like, do I really want to keep doing this? When you say deep, dark periods, like, I mean, you're running at 2:00 in the morning down like some abandoned road. Are you kind of getting in your own thoughts and starting to have like a little bit of a come to Jesus meeting with you about like life decisions, or like what for 7 days you're on your own? What are you thinking about?
It's all of the above, right? Anything can trigger thoughts, and for some people it becomes a very emotional experience. You just can't control it. It's you might just break down alongside a road somewhere and not know what caused it, but you feel like your world just ended. But then that's having the mental ability to say, wait, I know this is temporary. If I just keep going, I will get through this. There are off ramps for this race. You kind of mentioned a van, and there is support, minimal support from the race director. They have what's called a meat wagon, and the lady that drives the meat wagon, she drives the course over the 10 days. She'll stop and check on you. She won't give you anything. You're not allowed. So, but she gives you one thing, and that's her phone number. And if you want to quit, she's a phone call away. Now, she may be a couple 100 miles away, and she'll say, go grab a hotel or go sleep in a church or wherever you can find space, and she'll pick you up. But it might be a day or two. And that forces you to think, okay, I can take a few hours off my feet, think about it. And it's surprising the number of people that reconsider and say, okay, if I just get back on my feet, put one foot in front of the other, I'm going to finish this. And a lot of people do.
The number of people who call her to say, I want to quit, and she says, okay, I can't be there till tomorrow morning. And then by tomorrow morning, they're back in the race, you're saying?
They're back at it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you know now, having run one of those, that you did not know going into it?
The limits. I mean, I still haven't found them. There are longer races out there. I don't know that I need to go any further. I know that I can go as far as I want when I put my mind to it. One thing we haven't touched on, John, that was really eye-opening, right? There is so much division out there in the world today, so much hate, so much anger, whether it's political or whatever. Here I am running through rural Tennessee, complete strangers are offering me all sorts of food or water or a chair. It really shows that people are still human. And that was one of the biggest takeaways from my experience. There was just the kindness of people who live along the course, who drive along the course that help the runners out.
You painted it like a very enlightening and like sort of a peaceful journey. I think for some people hearing that, I think like they immediately go to like, ooh, wasn't it scary? Like sleeping under a bridge, or, I mean, the world can be a scary place, and you're running along the side of the road, or you're just, you're running through a bad section of town. Did you have moments where you're like, ooh, like I need to turn on the jets and get through this area, or I need to get off this section of road, or if something were to happen to me, nobody would find me? Was there moments like that?
Oh, absolutely, John. You try to hook up with other runners and spend time, and you meet some great people because you've literally got nothing else to do but tell folks your life story. And so you meet and some great friends, some people that I still stay in contact with today. But yeah, I mean, there's being in the dark alongside a highway in the middle of the night is not a pleasant experience. I don't know that anybody would say that it is. There was this one, I was running along a highway the first night, and it was just me, and I had a headlamp on, as you do. There's two ways you can approach nighttime on these journey runs. You can go ninja, or you can go Christmas tree. There's advantage, disadvantage to either, right? If you go ninja, no one can see you. But that's sometimes a good thing, because you get folks who do want to cause trouble, who may throw things at you or try to swerve at you if they see you. So you try to stay dark and then jump behind trees or guardrails when a car comes.
Yeah.
The other side of the spectrum is to light up like a Christmas tree so everybody sees you. But then there's drawbacks to that. So everybody has their preference. But I'm running along the freeway, and I've got my headlamp on, and the headlamp must have been dying or something, because I looked down at my feet, and the freeway moved, and I'm like, that's not right. And here was a copperhead that I was just almost stepped on. I had a pretty quick reaction for being about 50 miles into the race at that point. But yeah, so all sorts of things can be scary. There's all sorts of in more rural areas, folks leave their dogs run wild. Overnight.
Yeah.
So carry some mace to I never had to spray it. I did get charged a few times by dogs that you just don't know if they're friendly. You hope they are. So there's all sorts of danger out there, but it's just trying to minimize that danger, make it as safe as you can. But I'd be lying if I said it's not scary at times.
When you get to like 10 miles away, you've now run 304 miles. When you get to like, or let's just say you cross the 299 mark and you're at 300, is there does your body recover a little bit because you have like a little bit of an adrenaline dump? You're like, oh my God, I'm actually going to finish this thing. Or is there a point where you're like, oh my God, I have one marathon left, which is insane for just an average guy like me to think, oh my God, I only have one marathon. I only have 26 miles left. That's far longer than I care to run anyway. But is there a point where you're like, all right, I got this, and you kind of get a little pep in your step?
So
or is that like the last 100 yards?
Well, so for me, when I get towards the end of these really long races, that's when my body seizes up the most physically.
Okay.
And it's this weird phenomenon. Like, I may not have realized how the blisters hurt or my legs hurt or whatever hurts at that time, but those last few miles for me, have physically always been the hardest. Now it's the mental piece, and yeah, you get that sort of adrenaline rush and that thinking that I'm almost there, and so that's when you maybe pick up the pace, you run more, you whatever. But there's this sort of tension between the physical depletion and the mental motivation to finish strong. That 314-mile race is the end of that is nothing to sneeze at. It's a climb of a mountain.
Oh, Jesus.
It's a 2-lane road with hairpin switchbacks, and scary. I mean, you've got no shoulder, and so you do end up dodging some cars and some other things. But the last mile or so of that race, the road's called the Cheese Grater. So you're at the top of the mountain, and this road is so rough and beat up at the top of the mountain. It's like a private drive, and it just hasn't been maintained, and it hurts. Every step hurts. And then you enter this farm where the end line of this it's literally on a cliff, and you touch the edge of the cliff, and that's the end of the race. It's a beautiful view, and but you still wind your way for a couple miles through the dirt roads of this farm. So it's painful. Every step is really painful at that point, but you do find a way to mentally overcome.
I feel like somebody designed that on purpose to like just kind of stick the knife in and turn it at the very end.
And that's a great point, John. I mean, some of your listeners may have heard of this guy. The guy that designed that race, his name is Lazarus Lake. Gary Cantrell's his real name. His sort of trail name is Lazarus Lake, Laz for short. Laz designed one of the most famous and most difficult ultra marathons out there. It just happened a few weeks ago. It's called the Barkley Marathon. So I encourage you to look up the documentary. It floats around between the different streaming services, but it's a race that's been going on for maybe 4 decades. It's by invite only, about 40 people, and it's only the best of the best. And this race is more of a orienteering exercise than anything else, but it's about 125 miles. And of the 1,000 or 2,000 elite of the top elite athletes that have run this, something like 15 have finished. You look into it. It's a fascinating race, the Barkley Marathon.
15 each race, or 15 in the 40 years they've been doing it?
In 40 years.
Wow.
It's quite the challenge. They actually had 3 finishers this year. They've never had that before, so it was a good year. The weather was okay. I actually took a shot at running that race, not that race, but they have a mini version that is quite popular, and it's basically a 50K or 31 miles through the same parts of the forest that particular race goes through. That's the only race I have ever started and not finished. I made 8 miles before I said, this is crazy. This is enough of this. I'm going home.
How long was that race?
It's a 31-mile race. I made it 8 miles. It took me about 3 hours to go 8 miles, and I had enough. I drove home.
What was it about that race for a guy who has run 314 miles and slept on park benches? For a guy to quit after 8 miles, I'm curious. What was it about that race that just got you?
It's all terrain, right? So that one is mountains, going up and down mountains.
Oof.
Where I live, I don't have mountains. I train on asphalt, and there's not too many tripping hazards. Well, there was a ton of them out there in the park that we're state park we were running around. So it's just not. I had recently finished that 100-miler we talked about, and thought I was in shape, but I was not in shape for any kind of elevation.
How long does it take you to recover from like when you finish a 100-mile race?
It takes me a couple weeks. I work back into it. Usually, sign up for another race. That motivates me to get back out there on the road.
Do you go back to work like 2 days later?
As soon as I can, for sure. For sure.
What about for 340? You take a week off of work to go to run 314 miles. Do you take another week off to recover?
I think I was probably back right after that weekend, maybe a day. Yeah.
Wow. All right, man.
Actually, no, I take that back. It was COVID, so we were all remote at that time.
Oh.
So I was back working, but I wasn't going to work, if that makes sense. Let me clarify.
And I don't even know the right questions to ask about like the physiology of how your body recovers from something like that. I feel like there would be some recovery time where your body's just like, what the hell did we just do?
I did have to go get checked out by my doc, who's used to seeing me now after every big race like that. There's something I want him to check out, but this time I ended up having some nerve damage in my feet and my legs from the constant pounding. Fortunately, it resolved itself over weeks or a couple months, but I wasn't without injury. Minor.
You played college football at the highest levels. You played for Penn State, so you're playing at the highest levels, Division I college football. Do you think from the time you left football till the time you did this, were you trying to fill like that desire for like that physical and mental challenge? Was that something that was missing?
I don't know that that's entirely right. It's really just it's like I said before, it's part adventure, but it's part just continuous improvement and seeing how good I can get at things, how far I can push myself within safe limits. So you mentioned football, and I was an average athlete at best in high school, but I had a great skill that I knew was my ticket, and I might only run the 40-yard dash in 5 seconds. I don't know that I ever broke 5 seconds. I was 190 pounds, but I was also then a 3-year starter for Penn State. So, I think it just goes to show that anything is possible when you want it and you work for it.
So for people that don't know, you were the long snapper, the starting long snapper for Penn State, which is perhaps the least understood and least appreciated role on the football field for the skill set it requires and the impact it can have if you don't have a good long snapper. We've had lots of conversations about that. What don't people? This is the first time I've ever asked this. What don't people know about the long snapper? You are speaking for long snappers everywhere. This is your opportunity to represent the community.
I think we appreciate the anonymity, quite honestly, because it's the saying goes, if you're a popular long snapper, you're doing something wrong.
Fair enough.
Right? So if you're doing your job right and you're snapping that ball back there and it's not getting blocked and you're making it maybe a tackle or two, that's what they ask you to do. If you have bad snaps, people are going to know your name. So you really don't ever want to be a popular long snapper.
If you're doing something wrong, everybody knows your name. I'm sure there's people Googling right now, like, what is a long snapper or what does a long snapper do? All right. Well, you had an opportunity to represent the entire community of long snappers, and you came back with just remain anonymous.
We live in the shadows, and we're happy with that.
What are you guys like? Are you guys like Delta Force of the football world? We live in the shadows. Well, I'll tell you, man. Your running story is it's inspiring and it's kind of and it's intriguing because I think there's people who listen to this who go, you know what, I'm kind of getting in my own way, or we talk a lot about leadership on this podcast, and a lot of what we come back to very often is leadership is an internal thing, right? It's how you act, it's how you behave. It's not the position you're in. It's not the whatever the company or the organization designates you. It's how you act and behave, and most of that is a product of how you think and the mentality that you bring. I know you're in a leadership role with your company. When you think about what you've learned from doing these races and how you've challenged yourself, is there anything that you bring back then to the workforce that makes you a better leader because you have gotten comfortable being uncomfortable, or because you have not just been forced into positions of discomfort, you've chosen to find opportunities to be uncomfortable? Is there anything that kind of translates it back to the workforce?
then you hit the nail on the head, John. You got it. It's being comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It's challenging yourself and knowing that whatever's thrown at you, you're gonna figure it out. One thing we didn't touch on about those long races is it's a really long problem solving equation. You always have things going wrong, whether you don't have water, whether you've got something going wrong and you've got to figure out how to tape it or fix it or heal it real quick. You're constantly problem solving, and those skills translate into the corporate world. Listening skills. It's important to listen to your other runners and interact with folks just like you would in the corporate world. It's about being humble. By your experience and being humble as a leader. There's so many translations from ultra running and what you learn when you put yourself in those highly stressful situations that then translate to the corporate world, which can have equally as stressful situations. But now you've got the confidence, you've got that skill set, and you can achieve what you set out to do.
What's next? You've done 314. You said I don't think I need to, but you said, I'm paraphrasing, I didn't hit my limit. Well, or if I did, you pushed through it, which means that you've reset what you thought was a previous limit. Are you? There's two parts of that question. Are you still chasing something, or is there a point where you go, okay, I've tested, I know I could get to pass that, or is that's part one of the question. Part two is that a drug that you're constantly looking for, like, where is my breaking point? And it must be enlightening that you never find it, or when you find it, you move past it. But is that a never-ending cycle of just constantly trying to find it? So part one and part two.
Yeah, and remind me if I kind of miss part one and part two. I got a lot of things going through my head. Is it a drug? To some extent, yes, there is a high. There's just this excitement you feel when you cross that finish line. Have I found my limits? Absolutely not. Am I inspired to keep pushing those limits right now? No. 314 miles, there aren't many races longer than that out there. There's just a few. But the amount of time and dedication it takes to get your mind and your body ready for those races is a long time. And I've got a family, I've got a career, and need to make sure that my priorities stay aligned. I'd love to be out there chasing these long races every summer or fall or whenever they take place, but I have other things that need my attention. Finishing 314 miles is an amazing accomplishment, but my biggest achievement, in my opinion, is my family, my kids, my wife, and they deserve time and attention. I've looked at other races. In fact, I did sign up and completed. There's a 200 miler that went across Ohio. I think delayed one of our tailgating excursions, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it did.
That took me 4 days. I ran across Ohio and back. It was a 200 miler. It was a different challenge than the 314. It was very similar. It was self-supported, but just a different challenge. That the temperatures were different, the terrain was different. But I finished that, and I really I didn't have a next step, and that's okay. There'll be next steps. I've taken up other activities, other things to challenge me. But like I said, my priorities are a little bit different right now. So no long races on the calendar is sort of the answer to I think one of your questions.
I think you actually answered both. What's next, and is it a drug that you just have to keep chasing? Last question for those who are listening and go, hey man, I like that idea. Like, I love the idea of using that to push myself. And boy, I ran a marathon 10 years ago, but man, doing 100 miles would be the next level of chasing a little bit of that drug, where I felt like a sense of purpose and a sense of accomplishment doing it. For somebody who's listening to this going, yeah, I think that's what I want to do. What do they need to know going into it?
Listen, I'd first of all say it doesn't need to be as extreme as what we've talked about, John. There's folks that have never run a 5K, and if that's their goal, that's a fantastic and amazing goal. Don't think you have to go out and run a half marathon, a full marathon, or whatever that next step is for you. You decide what motivates you, and then go do it. Put a plan together and go do it. Don't worry about, running 314 miles. That's not something for everybody. I get it. And one of the things that I really, really love about being able to tell my story, John, is when it does inspire people to do something. When folks have said, "Hey, Brandon, I know you were out there grinding for the past week in Tennessee, crossing Tennessee, so I got out and rode my bike." It's something they wouldn't have otherwise done. Let's get healthy. Let's get out there and just be active and have some adventure. That'd be my advice.
Right on, man. Where can folks find you on the interweb?
Oh, I'm out there. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter account, but I'm not real active. But happy to connect with folks through LinkedIn if they want, make some connections there. I'd love to hear from folks.
Awesome. All right, Brandon Parmer, spokesperson for long snappers everywhere, and ultra marathoner, ultra racer, ultra long distance runner.
It's all good. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John. It was fun.
Great talking with you.